The shelter was a place of constant noise. The high-pitched barks of puppies, the anxious whimpers of newly arrived dogs, the shuffle of staff members' footsteps against the cold concrete floor. The air carried a suffocating mix of disinfectant and cheap kibble, clinging to every corner, every cage, every trembling body waiting for a chance. Among the rows of kennels, one dog remained still. Aslam. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He didn't rush to the gate whenever a visitor passed by. He had learned it didn't matter. Once, he had tried. Once, he had wagged his tail and lifted his head whenever someone stopped in front of his cage, his hopeful eyes searching the faces of those humans who, inevitably, moved on to the next. He had watched smaller, younger, livelier dogs being chosen. He had seen them run down the hallways, feeling fresh air for the first time while he stayed behind. Time passed, and hope faded, like a fire left to die in the wind. Now, Aslam spent his days curled in the same corner, his head resting on his paws, his tired eyes following only the movement of shadows dancing on the wall. He heard the sounds of locks clicking open and shut, the metallic clinks that had once meant possibility. Now, they were just the background noise of a routine that never changed. Dim lights flickered from the ceiling, casting uneven shadows across the concrete floor. Bits of straw were scattered over the small space where he slept. His worn-out, tattered bed still carried faint traces of the dogs that had come before him. He didn't know how long he had been there. In those cages, time wasn't measured in days but in the sound of gates opening and chains being removed. He had lost count of how many times that ritual had repeated, taking others away while leaving only the echo of footsteps that never came for him. And so, Aslam waited. Not because he still believed, but because there was nothing else left to do. The afternoon was fading when they arrived at the shelter. The autumn wind swept through the dry trees in the parking lot, scattering golden leaves across the damp asphalt. The glass door creaked open, and the footsteps of two people echoed against the concrete floor. The couple walked through the corridor, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Michael stayed close to Anna, his movements careful, always near enough to catch her if she needed support. There was a quiet protectiveness in the way he walked beside her, like he was trying to shield her from time itself. Anna looked fragile, but her eyes were full of life. There was a silent tenderness in her gaze as she passed each kennel, watching hopeful eyes and wagging tails. Dogs pressed their noses against the cold metal bars, pleading for a second chance. But Anna didn't stop. Aslam sensed them before he even saw them. It was like a call, a primal instinct awakening something inside him that had long been dormant. For so long, he had ignored the sound of footsteps. The scent of passing humans no longer interested him. But now, for the first time in ages, he stood up. His eyes met Anna's before her voice was even heard. And then, in a moment that defied everything he had come to expect, he stepped forward. The shelter workers noticed immediately. Aslam never moved when people approached. He never reacted. But now, his eyes were locked onto that woman, as if he recognized something invisible to everyone else. The air shifted. There was something about the way the couple moved, a weight that Aslam could feel pressing against his chest. He didn't know what sadness was. He didn't understand the meaning of death. But he knew that this woman was fading. There was something about her scent, like fallen autumn leaves, like a breeze that lingers before winter arrives. A restless energy stirred inside him. He looked at Michael, then at Anna, then at the door, as if he understood that this was his only chance. A low, rusted whine escaped his throat, and he placed his paws against the bars. Anna stopped. She didn't choose Aslam. Aslam chose her. For a moment, no one spoke. Silence filled the corridor, broken only by the whisper of leaves rustling outside. Anna took a slow step forward, then knelt in front of the kennel. Aslam didn't retreat. He simply watched her, like he already knew who she was. Like he already knew he belonged at her side. The staff exchanged glances. None of them had ever seen this dog act this way before. Michael looked at Anna, searching for an answer in her expression. But Anna already knew. When the papers were signed and the leash was slipped around Aslam's neck, he didn't resist. He didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the cage without looking back. Outside, the wind swayed the branches, carrying the scent of damp earth. Aslam took a deep breath, feeling the world around him for the first time in years. Anna held the leash, and Aslam followed. Not because he had to. But because he knew he was meant to. He didn't understand death. But he understood that there was something in her that needed him. And for the first time, Aslam wasn't waiting anymore. He was going home. The door opened to a world unlike anything Aslam had ever known. The first thing that told him he wasn't at the shelter anymore was the scent. The air carried warmth, the smell of wood, freshly brewed coffee, and soft fabrics. The silence of the house was comforting, far from the relentless barking and the cold echoes of metal cages. The floor beneath his paws wasn't hard and freezing, it was covered with a plush carpet that sank slightly under his weight. The lights weren't harsh, didn't flicker with the electric hum of fluorescent bulbs. Here, the lighting was soft, golden, as if the entire house whispered that there was no rush. But Aslam didn't move. He stood in the middle of the living room, his muscles tense, his eyes scanning every corner of the space. The cushioned bed near the fireplace, the time-worn furniture, the framed pictures on the wall, everything was both familiar and completely unknown. The couple stepped back, giving him space. They didn't call him. They didn't tug on the leash, didn't expect anything from him. And that unsettled him even more. He was used to strict rules, cold walls, the smell of disinfectant, and the hurried gazes of shelter workers. But here, no one demanded anything. For the first few days, Aslam kept his distance. He found a quiet corner and stayed there, motionless, just watching. He didn't approach the bed. He didn't touch his food while they were nearby. His body remained curled up, his breathing silent, his eyes always alert. At night, when everything was still, he would roam the house, sniffing each room like an explorer in unfamiliar territory. He traced the imprints of life in the objects around him, the scent of Anna lingering on the couch, Michael's presence in the coats hanging by the door. But something deeper held him back. He could sense the shadow of fragility in the air. There was something about Anna that unsettled him. He saw it when she sat by the window, staring outside with an expression he couldn't understand. He noticed the moments when her breathing grew short, when Michael held her hand a little tighter. Aslam knew. He felt the difference in the way she moved, the way her scent carried a faint trace of something irreversible. Something fading into the wind, like autumn leaves. And because of that, he couldn't bring himself to get close. He knew she needed him. But fear held him back. Anna never forced anything. She simply waited. In those moments when he hid in the corner of the room, she would sit on the floor, not too close, never too far. She didn't call him. She just stayed there, letting time fill the space between them. And slowly, night after night, the distance between them began to shrink. First, just a few inches. Then, a longer glance. A deeper breath. Time moved slowly inside that house. And Aslam, without even realizing it, was starting to belong there. But he still didn't know how to cross that last barrier. He still didn't know how to surrender.
What do you think of the story so far? Will Aslan adapt to his new home? And what about Anna? Will she have the support she needs in her final days? Keep watching to find out. But first, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this.
The change didn't happen suddenly. It came slowly, like a leaf drifting from a tree in autumn. In the first few days, Aslam was just a shadow in the house, silent and distant. But then, small things began to happen. One morning, when Anna placed his food bowl on the floor and stepped back, he didn't wait for her to leave the room. He ate there, in her presence, even though his breathing was heavy and hesitant. Another day, when Michael reached out to touch him, Aslam didn't pull away. He didn't lean into it, but he didn't run either. It was a brief moment, but one filled with meaning. And then, one night, it happened. Anna was on the couch, wrapped in a thin blanket. The lamp beside her cast a warm, golden glow, creating soft shadows on the walls. She wasn't calling Aslam, wasn't expecting anything from him. She simply watched the fire flicker in the fireplace, the flames swaying slowly, as if time inside that house moved differently than the time outside. Aslam watched her from a distance, his eyes following her slow, measured movements. He could feel the weight of exhaustion in her posture, the way she tried to conceal her pain. And without realizing it, he began to move. It was a small gesture at first. One step, then another. His body lowered gently beside the couch, close enough to feel her warmth. He didn't know why he was doing it. He just knew he needed to be there. For a long time, he stayed still, listening to her breathing, the rustle of the blanket, the soft crackle of burning wood. And then, without thinking, he lowered his head and rested it on her arm. Anna didn't move. She didn't speak. She just smiled. A smile so subtle it seemed meant only for him. She lifted her hand slowly and ran her fingers through Aslam's rough fur, not like someone trying to tame an animal, but like someone who understood a soul that had once been broken. And Aslam allowed it. At that moment, something inside him changed. He was no longer just a shelter dog. No longer just a survivor. He was part of that home. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The days passed, and the house changed. The silence grew heavier, thicker. The scent of warm tea and herbs, once lingering in the air, now mixed with the faint aroma of medicine and freshly washed blankets. The sun still streamed through the window every morning, but Anna no longer greeted it with the same enthusiasm. She slept more. Walked less. And Aslam could feel it. He watched her. Always. He noticed the way her fingers took longer to turn the pages of a book, how her steps grew shorter, how her breathing slowed. Her scent had changed. It was subtle, but it was there. Michael tried to hide the pain, but he couldn't. He spoke little and spent more time by Anna's side, as if trying to hold on to every moment before it was too late. And Aslam? He never left her side again. If he had once hesitated to get close, now he was always there. Even when she slept, he kept watch. When Michael went out to get medicine, when the house felt too empty, when everything seemed too fragile, he stayed. Watching. And then, that night, the storm arrived. Rain pounded against the roof with unrelenting force, running down the windows like silent tears. The wind whistled through the cracks in the house, making the curtains sway gently. In the distance, a faint rumble of thunder echoed across the sky, shaking the wooden walls. On the couch, under a soft blanket, Anna slept. The fire in the fireplace flickered lower, its light wavering, casting slow-moving shadows on the walls. And there, on the floor, Aslam lay beside her. He didn't sleep. He only listened. He heard her breathing, slow and deep. He heard the ticking of the clock on the shelf, marking time as it slipped away like sand through fingers. He heard the rain, persistent, relentless. He moved closer. His warm body against hers, his head resting near the couch. Anna sighed in her sleep. Her frail hand, barely moving, slipped down, finding Aslam's rough fur. Even in slumber, her fingers brushed against him in a gentle caress. He closed his eyes. As if trying to hold on to that moment. As if knowing there was nothing more important than this. And while the storm raged outside, Aslam stayed. keeping watch. Protecting. Waiting. The storm had passed. But inside the house, the silence remained. Morning arrived slowly, wrapped in a heavy stillness, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. The pale sunlight filtered through the cracks in the curtains, but its glow felt weaker, dimmer. And then came the emptiness. Anna left without a sound, without goodbyes, without promises to return. Her body still lay there, wrapped in the same blanket that had covered her the night before. But life had slipped away, like a breath dissolving into the wind. Michael knelt beside her, his hands trembling, his shoulders shaking under the weight of a grief too heavy to contain. The world around him seemed distant, colorless, as if everything had been suspended in time. And Aslam? He didn't move. Still lying beside the couch, his head resting against the floor, he simply watched. His chest rose and fell slowly, his breath a warm whisper against the cold carpet. But he didn't get up. He didn't bark. He didn't cry. He just stayed. Waiting. Because he knew. He knew Anna would not wake up again. He knew that this house, once full of warmth and life, was now drowning in an irreversible silence. Michael buried his face in his hands. The pain came in waves, crashing over him, again and again, without mercy. Aslam moved closer. His warm body pressed against Michael's leg, his presence steady and silent. Michael lifted his gaze, his eyes red and wet, meeting the dog's. No words were spoken. None were needed. There, in a house that now felt far too big for just the two of them, they shared a grief that required no explanation. The clock on the wall continued its steady ticking. But for them, time had stopped. The days passed, one after another, dragging by like dry leaves in the wind. The house was no longer the same. Every corner held echoes of what once was. Anna's favorite mug still sat on the shelf. Her scent still lingered in the clothes Michael couldn't bring himself to put away. The flowers she had planted in the garden now swayed with the breeze, as if they, too, felt her absence. But in the midst of that emptiness, something remained. Aslam. He was no longer the forgotten dog at the shelter, the one who waited in silence for someone to notice him. Now, he walked beside Michael. Always. When Michael got up in the morning, Aslam was already there, watching him with quiet, knowing eyes. When he stepped outside into the garden, Aslam followed, their steps synchronized, as if they moved to the same rhythm. There was something different about him now, something that hadn't been there before. A sense of belonging. He was no longer just a rescued dog. He was a guardian. Michael noticed that Aslam no longer slept in the farthest corner of the house. Now, he slept at the foot of the bed, where Anna once lay. As if he knew that place still needed someone. Time passed, and the pain of Anna's absence became a quiet presence, one that was no longer unbearable. Michael found himself repeating her gestures. He placed an extra blanket for Aslam on cold nights. He prepared his meals with more care. And for the first time, he understood what Anna meant when she spoke of second chances. She hadn't chosen Aslam out of pity. She knew. She knew that more than just a dog in need of a home, Aslam was a home waiting for someone. And now, looking at him, Michael realized that Aslam wasn't the only one who had been saved. They both had. And in some way, Anna was still there. Not in her absence, but in the presence she had left behind. In Aslam's gaze. In the quiet love that bound them together. In the space that would never be empty again. Because even without being there, she had made them belong to each other. And that was the true second chance. Not all love stories begin the way we imagine. Some are born in the silence of a glance, in the recognition of shared pain, in the choice to stay, even when everything seems lost. Anna knew that life wasn't about how much time we have, but what we do with it. She chose to turn her final days into hope for another soul forgotten by the world. And Aslam, the dog no one wanted, gave back in the only way he knew how, by staying. After all, true love doesn't need promises. It exists in quiet presence, in unwavering loyalty, in the certainty that even when someone leaves, what was shared never truly disappears. Michael never imagined that, in the midst of his grief, he would find Anna's last gift in a dog. And Aslam never knew that, when he chose that couple at the shelter, he was already finding his home, long before he ever walked through its door. Because, in the end, life always finds a way to bring together those who are meant to meet. And love always finds a way to endure.
What did you think of this moving story? Leave your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to share this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to hear more incredible stories like this one.